Welcome to the Flash Essential Training Series. I'm Mike King, your host, and in this tutorial we're actually going to start talking about conditional statements in ActionScript 3, and this will be part one of a two-part series on the if statement in ActionScript 3. So conditionals in ActionScript 3. ActionScript 3 provides three basic conditional statements that can be used to control the program flow of your Flash applications. They are the if, else, which is the one we're going to look at in this particular exercise, if, else, if, and then the switch statement. We will be covering the if, else statements in this set of tutorials. And again, like I said, it's going to be a two-part series on the if, and then we're going to get into the if, else portion of those conditional statements. There'll be two parts in the tutorial series. The if statement is a basic conditional statement that is used when you need to execute a block of code which depends upon some condition evaluating to true. The basic syntax for the if statement is as follows. So we'll have the if statement itself, then inside parentheses we're going to have an expression that's got to evaluate to true. Then we're going to have an opening curly brace, and then inside the opening and closing curly braces there'll be a block of code to be executed when the expression evaluates to true. And that's the key to an if statement. The expression inside the parentheses must evaluate to true in order for the code inside the curly braces to be executed. When the Boolean value of the expression is true, the code between the brackets will be executed. Remember, if the expression is not a Boolean expression inside the expression statement, which means the value it returns is not a Boolean value, then the value of the expression will be auto-converted into the Boolean value by the mechanism called implicit coercion inside of ActionScript 3. So in other words, if we have something inside those parentheses that's not truly a Boolean statement, it's going to be converted to a Boolean statement anyway, because that's the only thing that conditional statement else or if recognizes. And we'll talk more about those in future tutorials, those implicit coercions. We'll get into a tutorial on those as we move forward in the tutorial series. So let's get into our development environment, work through some exercises using the if statement in ActionScript 3. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize my presentation and drop down into my development environment. I'm going to go ahead and load up Flash Professional. You'll notice I've got my standard branding layer loaded, as we do in all our previous tutorials. So in this tutorial, we're going to begin our discussion of conditional statements in ActionScript 3. So exactly what are conditional statements? Well, conditional statements are statements in ActionScript that allow the application to make decisions based on the condition of the application. It gives Flash the ability to think for itself based on the values in the application, and then allows for more interactive applications as we move through them. Conditional statements are used throughout applications developed in Flash and most other programming languages. If you've taken any of my stuff in PHP or any of the other programming languages that we actually talk about on the site, conditional statements are very, very similar in all those different languages, and they give us paths that we can take based on the program, what's occurring in the actual program itself. So during this tutorial, we'll build on our existing knowledge of ActionScript 3 and add more functionality to our applications by allowing them to make determinations based on the data in the application. A conditional statement tests whether conditions are met or what the results of another action is, and performs an action based on the results. So most programmers refer to conditional statements as flow control elements of the application. We use these types of statements to control the flow of the code during application execution. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is let's go ahead and add two layers to our timeline. So I'm going to go right above my branding layer. I'm going to go ahead and insert a layer. My middle layer is going to be my graphics. We've used this one quite a bit before. Then right above that, I'm going to go ahead and insert another layer. That's going to be my actions layer. So we're going to put our action script, and I'm going to go ahead and lock the actions layer. Okay, so now I want to add a graphic to our stage. So I'm going to go ahead and select frame one of my actions layer. I'm going to go ahead, as we've done in previous exercises, I'm going to go ahead and grab one of my images. I'm just going to grab this little helicopter image, open up one of my images that we've used in a previous exercise. I'm just going to go ahead and grab the helicopter image and pull it onto my stage. Convert that to a bitmap. And then as we've done in the past, I'm going to go ahead and select that image because I want this obviously to be a part of. When I actually put that on my actions layer, I did not want to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and select it. And I cut from the actions layer, lock that actions layer, and go put it on my graphics layer. I'm actually going to select that image and convert this to a symbol as we've done in the past. So I'm going to select F8 to bring up my convert to symbol dialog box. I'm going to say MC, HELI, from my helicopter, click OK, and then go ahead and delete that from my stage because I should have that now as part of my library, and I do. I've got that actual movie clip inside my library, so I'm going to go ahead and select frame one of my my graphics layer and drag one of those symbols onto my stage. Now that we've got that as part of the library, I'm going to go ahead and lock that graphics layer. Let's go ahead and save our work. I'm going to do save as, and as we've done in the past, I'm going to save this as 1014 underscore example 1. And this will be our first file that we're going to be using. All my layers should be locked. Now I'm going to go ahead and select frame one of my actions layer. I'm going to open up my actions panel, F9 in Windows, Option F9 in the Mac. I've got mine actually just docked on the right hand side where I've had it for most of our exercises. And now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and enter some code. And basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an event listener. So right inside my actions layer, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my stop, come right below that, and I'm going to add an event listener listening to my helicopter underscore MC. I want to go ahead and save those changes to this file. And the first thing I want to do before I do anything else, let's go ahead and close that actions layer for a minute because I did not give this an instance name. I want to go ahead and unlock that graphics layer, select my helicopter symbol, open up the properties panel because I'd forgotten to give him an instance name. HELI underscore MC. That's going to be the instance name for this particular symbol. Go ahead and close that. Now I can go ahead and relock that graphics layer and save those changes. Because we've got to have an instance name if we're going to refer to the symbol inside of ActionScript. I'm going to go ahead and open up, select frame one of the actions layer, reopen the actions panel, F9 in Windows, Option F9 in the Mac. And now let's go ahead and put in a function here. Because what I've done is I've added an event listener to my movie clip, my helicopter movie clip that's listening for a mouse click event. And now what I want to do is on that mouse click event, I'm just going to go ahead and create a function. And this function is going to be called onClick. That's we actually named it in the event handler. And basically what it's going to do, it's going to take that target, which is that movie clip, and it's going to add 100 on the y-axis to it, 100 pixels on the y-axis to whatever the current value is. And I want to go ahead and just make this movie clip a button. And we've done this in an earlier tutorial where we actually gave it a button mode property to make it act like a button inside of our file. So I'm going to come right down below my function and add this button mode movie clip to this. Go ahead and save my changes. Good time to pause if you want to type that in, and then we're going to talk through this code real quick. So the first line, the event listener, adds an event listener or a mouse event to the helicopter graphic on the stage. This tells ActionScript that when the helicopter is clicked with the mouse, perform an onClick function. And that onClick function is the function that we wrote. The onClick function is a standard function we've been writing throughout the tutorials. Notice, as in the previous tutorial, we're not referring to the movie clip by its instance name. Once again, we're using the evt.target to identify the actual target of our code. We'll be using these frequently going forward, and again, the reason being is it cuts down on the amount of code we have to write because I can actually use this function now based on a lot of different things that are on my stage, and they'll be doing the same or similar things. And by using the target identifier, I can give that same function to numerous different symbols on my stage. The EVT target refers to the target of the event listener, in this case the helicopter movie clip. We could have written this different ways, but we're going to start using these target events as it allows the reuse of common code and keeps our application smaller in size. You'll see more of this as we move forward and get a better understanding of how beneficial this practice is in coding. Remember that our -= tells ActionScript to move the helicopter's Y position 100 pixels from its present location, so we're constantly adding to that. The last line of code we've used many times in the past, and we're just telling ActionScript to treat the helicopter movie clip as a button. This way, when we hover over the movie clip with our mouse, the cursor will change to a hand cursor. So again, let's go ahead and save our work. I'm going to go ahead and test this movie. Control-Enter in Windows, Command-Return on the Mac. And you'll notice now we get the hand symbol. If I were to click, it moves it 100 pixels. If I were to click, it moves it off the stage this time. Notice we actually lost it because the second time I clicked, it moved it completely off the stage. If I were to go ahead and move this down, and that's what we're going to see. Let me go ahead and unlock the graphics layer for a minute. Move this to the bottom so we can actually get more than one interaction with it. Save the change. Refresh our browser window. Go ahead and click. Again, click. Again, every time I click on it, it's moving it up 100 pixels based on the size of our stage. And that's where we're actually going to put our conditional statement in, because it's going to look at its present location, and then it's going to determine whether we're going to move it up or we're going to stop and move it. So when you click the helicopter, you'll notice the code is run and the rocket moves to a Y position 100 pixels less than its current location. If you clicked it multiple times, which we did, it moves off the stage. You'll notice that a rocket moves up the stage but never comes back down. Eventually it will move off the stage. We could set up an additional event listener that would perform the move procedure based on different parameters other than the click event. But we would be more efficient would be to write toggling action that would perform an up action and then a down action with every other click. Toggling actions of switches in code is very common in application development. So let's add a toggling feature to our demonstration using an if statement. Let's enhance our code by adding the following additional code to the code we currently have, and it's going to give it a toggling feature inside that application. So again, I'm going to select frame one of the actions layer. I'm going to open up my actions panel, F9 in Windows, Option F9 in the Mac. And the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and add a variable. So I'm going to come right below where I've got my stop function. I'm going to declare a variable, and it's going to be called move up. And I'm going to data type that variable as a boolean. And we talked about booleans inside of our presentation. And then I'm going to give it an initial value of true. And then inside my function, where I've got this on-click function running, I'm going to go ahead and remove that event target code from inside that function, give myself a couple lines, and this is where we're going to put in our conditional statement. So I'm going to say if, and inside parentheses, move up, close my parentheses, open my curly brace, EVT.target. So again, we're doing basically the same thing we had done before, minus equal 100, and that with a semicolon, and then I'm going to say move up equal false. So what I'm doing is I'm changing the value of that variable move up when I execute this first line of code. And again, we'll talk more about this in a minute. Then I'm going to come right below that, where my curly brace ends, I'm going to say else EVT.target plus equal. So now instead of doing a minus equal, I'm doing a plus equal 100. And then I'm going to come down here and say move up equal true. And make sure I spell my variable correctly. That's got all kinds of squirrely in that one. Let's go ahead and save these changes. Actually, I'm going to do a save as. Let's go ahead and save this as example number 2. Inside of our work files, in the event you have access to those. And we'll talk about this code in a minute. But what I want you to notice here is I'm evaluating again. This time I'm evaluating this move up variable. And I'm looking for, is it true or is it false? Remember, because that's all we can do in a conditional statement. I'm initially setting this variable to true. So it comes in the very first time, it looks at move up, it says, is it true? Yes, it is. So it's going to run this code. The last line I do in here is actually set this to false. So the next time I click on this, it's going to look at the move up and say, is it true? And it's going to say, no, it's not. It's actually false now. So it's going to do the else code. And then it's going to move it back down and reset it to true. So basically what we're doing is we're toggling the value of the variable, and that's determining what group of code is run inside my conditional statement. So first we declare our variable. The variable is going to hold a true or false value that we will inform the rest of the code whether or not the rocket has moved up or not. Since it's holding a true value or a false value, as we discussed in the earlier tutorial, this type of a data type is best declared as a boolean. So we've set our variable move up as a boolean data type. As a reminder, we place our variables at the top of the code because when Flash loads, it reads everything from the top down. It also makes it easier to identify all the variables in the code if they're located in one location. So again, as we've done in previous tutorials, we always declare our variables first, then we start writing our code. Declaring variables at the top of our code is also a best practice. We've declared the initial variable of our variable as true, or the initial value of our variable as true. We've removed our original EBT.target statement and replaced it with an if block of code. If move up, so in other words, if that's true, when we start the if conditional statement, we always start with the if word. The code that immediately follows in the parentheses is the condition that must be met that produces a true or false value. In most cases, you would write an expression in the parentheses similar to, I could do anything here. Is this equal to this? Is this greater than this? Is this less than this? And you'll see as we move through the tutorials, we can have all kinds of different types of expressions inside these parentheses. But right now, we're just basically holding a true or false for this particular demonstration. So when we're using Boolean data types, there's only two values that it can hold. It's either a true or a false. Since this is a Boolean data type, Flash makes the assumption that you want to test if it is true. Because of that assumption, we do not have to type move up equal true. It assumes it has to be true in order to execute that if code. But if we wanted to, we could have done the same thing. So we could actually, if we wanted to, we could actually make this move up equal true. Remember, we'd have to use two equal signs because that's an evaluation and not an assignment. But we could actually said that. But it assumes that we want true or false. So based on what we've said, the if statement will only execute if that has what is in the parentheses is true. This is a very important concept to remember because it's true with all our conditional statements. The next line of code determines what occurs if the statement is true. So we have said that if the helicopter is moved up 100 pixels, the statement's true. So we want to move it back down. We add the line of code, ebt.target y minus equal. Moves it down. So since we moved it up, we subtract 100 pixels from its present location. The next line sets the move up variable to false, setting so that when the code is run again, the application knows the helicopter has not been moved up and is actually in the lower position. So the next line of code contains the else statement. The else statement is another type of conditional statement. It can only follow an if statement, so we can't use else by itself. It has to follow an if, and the code in here always executes if this evaluates to false. So if the expression evaluates to false, the else code executes. If the expression evaluates to true, the if code executes. So let's go ahead and save our work. Let's go ahead and test this movie. Control Enter in Windows, Command Return on the Mac. If I click it once, oops, hang on, I've got an error. All right, so I see what I've done. It's kind of funny, actually. Let's go ahead and close this out. Let's go back into our Actions panel. What I've done is I have not put what we're actually adjusting here. EBT.target should be .y, and this one should be .y. I actually left that out. It's not going to work that way because I'm not addressing any particular values that I actually want to adjust. Let's go ahead and save those changes. Again, test our movie, Control Enter in Windows, Command Return on the Mac. Now if I click on this, it's going to go up. Click on it again, it's going to come down. And again, it's because we're doing the toggling effect. Let's go ahead and move it up into the center of our stage. It's because we're actually doing this toggling effect inside of ActionScript. I'm going to go ahead and save the change. Test the movie, Control Enter in Windows, Command Return on the Mac. So now if I click it once, it goes up. If I come back and click it again, it goes down. And it's based on the fact we're doing this toggling effect with our ActionScript code. So I'm going to go ahead and select frame 1 of that actions layer again, open up our actions panel. And again, it's looking whether it's moved up is true. If it has, it's going to subtract. If it is not true because it's been set to false, then it's going to add. So it's very interesting or very similar to how we use these things. And we use a lot of these as we actually control our program flow. But again, you get used to the fact that whatever is in between your parentheses, whatever your expression is, must evaluate to true for the if statement code, which is the first set of code in the curly braces, to be executed. So we clicked the helicopter several times to ensure the code was working correctly. The helicopter movie clip should move up and down on the stage, which it did. All right, so we've seen that using a conditional statement, we can toggle the types of actions that we give our movie clip. But what if we wanted the movie clip to move to the edge of the stage and then start moving back down? So let's modify the code so it's a little bit more intelligent in how it reacts to the input. So what I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead, open up my actions panel. I'm going to make sure I've got all my changes saved, which I do. I am going to do a save as. I want to save this as example number 3, because what we're actually going to do now is we're actually going to have, we use that enter frame event in an earlier exercise, and I basically want to do the same thing, but I want to do it with this. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out all my code, other than my stop statement, because we know we want to keep that one in there. Now inside my action script, the first thing I want to do is I want to put an event listener on our stage. And we actually did this in the previous tutorial where we were actually looking at event listeners in the enter frame event. We're going to do the same thing. I'm going to give my event listener to my stage, and I'm going to be listening for that enter frame event. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a function right below where I've got my event listener. And that function is going to be based on moving the helicopter we've done before. Let me go ahead and clean up my code a little bit. Get this nice and cleaned up so you can type it in. Because I like to keep things organized. It makes it a little bit easier for you to read. Or at least I think it does. Don't need all these extra spaces here, but I want them for clarity so it's easier for you to see what's going on. So now I've got my if statement. First off, I've added an event listener to the stage that's listening for the enter frame event. And it's linked to this move helicopter function or move heli function. And then here I've created the function. I've got this move heli function, which again, listening for that enter frame event, no data return, so I'm data typing it a void. And I say if the heli underscore MC dot X is greater than 320. So it's looking at the position of the helicopter and saying, if you're greater than 320, I want you to subtract. I'm going to take this and actually move this heli underscore MC dot X to 25. So it's going to move it back to the top of the stage. Else, it's going to plus or minus 3 to it. So it's going to keep running this as a conditional statement now inside my event listener for that stage event. Let's go ahead and save all these changes. Let's go ahead and test our movie. We're going to do Control Enter in Windows, Command Return in the Mac. And you'll notice now it's there, it's watching it scroll across the stage, and then it comes back. Scrolls across the stage and then comes back. So the event listener that's listening for that on enter frame event is listening for it. It's looking for the position of that X position of the actual helicopter symbol itself. When it sees it get above 320, it resets it back to 25. And it runs back to 320, then resets it back to 25. So it's actually using the conditional statement to make the determination as to where it's at and how it's going to reposition it. Good time for you to pause if you want to type this in. So the enter frame event's one that we'll use often. We just discussed it in the previous tutorial. Remember, the enter frame event's triggered every time the Flash movie enters a frame. In the case of our movie, that's 15 frames per second based on our settings in the property panel, because I believe we're still set at 15 frames per second. So let's go ahead and look. And no, we're actually set to 24 frames per second this time. So we're running at 24 frames per second. Inside the enter frame event, we call the function name move heli. The function consists of an if statement that looks at the present X position of the rocket based on where it's located. I'm sorry, our helicopter based on where it's located, and performs 2 different types of actions on that movie clip. And it either moves it across the stage or it resets it back to a position of 25. So I hope that gives you a basic understanding of how these conditional statements work in the if statement. This was part 1 of the tutorial. In part 2, we're going to get a little bit deeper into this conditional statement and some of the more advanced things we can do with the if statement inside of ActionScript 3. All right, so let's drop back down into our presentation for a minute because I want to go over that syntax for that if-else statement that we used in the demonstration. So the syntax of an if-else statement, which was the last example we saw in this demonstration, again, we have the if statement itself with our expression that must evaluate to true. Then we have a block of code to be executed when the expression evaluates to true. And in this case, you saw us set that boolean value. Then we have an else statement, so that if this evaluates to false, the code inside the else block will execute whenever this expression up top does not evaluate to true. You can see a lot of if-else statements in program flow, so I wanted to go over real quick how that syntax is set up inside of our program flow. And in the next demonstration, we're going to get a little bit deeper into our conditional statements in ActionScript 3. We're going to get a little bit deeper into the if statement itself. We're going to look at using a login process and how we could use an if statement to determine whether or not a user was valid for this particular login. So I look forward to seeing you in the next tutorial.